very pleased to have Dave Swindell, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Retirement System, to join us today to talk about how he and his system have adapted to the COVID epidemic. Dave, maybe to start off, if you could just give a brief overview of your organization in terms of your operations and facilities and staffing, that may be a good place to start.
Sure. Greetings to everyone from Cheyenne. The Wyoming Retirement System is a consolidated pension system involving almost all public employees in the state of Wyoming. We have about between $8.5 and $9 billion under management, about 32,000 retirees, about 42,000 active contributing members to the system, and a number of people with money on deposit with us. We have 8 defined benefit plans. The big plan, the public employee plan, is 88% of our business, but we have smaller plans for firefighters, law enforcement, and judges, just like many pension systems do. We also are the plan sponsor of a voluntary 457 retirement savings program with about 700 to $800 million in it, with about 20,000 participants in that. So that's the scale of the operation. And we have 49 souls on board. It's kind of just a large platoon. I'm a retired Army officer. I talk in terms of that. And that includes the 2 summer interns. So on a given day, we have about 47 full-time people.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Okay, thanks, Dave. That's a great overview. So when the pandemic started to take effect and we became aware of we needed to make some changes quickly and protect our people, what kinds of things did you do? How did you react to redeploying your people, and what did that really take?
Yeah, here in Wyoming, the big date on the calendar is probably the 14th of March. That was a Sunday, and it was announced that schools would not open the following day. And so Monday morning, we woke up and schools weren't going to be open, and it was an immediate issue with childcare on the staff because many people needed to stay home with their kids. We were reasonably well equipped to begin working from home. It was a little rocky at first because not everybody had access to it. In the previous environment, working from home had been kind of a tightly controlled thing. It existed. We were well placed with our investment team, but the rest of the staff, only a few people really had the ability, were already authorized to work from home and had access to the state's computer networks and so on. But we quickly adapted. The technology department instituted new streamlined policies, as did HR in the state. And within 3 days, we had about 2/3 of the staff working from home and only 1/3 in the office, because we still had to make sure that the office was open to the public. And there were some things like opening mail and initially at least scanning documents into the system so that others could work on them. That all had to be done manually here in the office. But we were able to get quite a few people working from home. And by the end of the week, we'd settled into about 2/3 at home, 1/3 in the office. And that's kind of where we've been ever since.
Great. What about working with the board and its committees, and how have you been able to conduct those meetings, and how has it impacted the effectiveness of the board?
Well, our last physical board meeting was in February when the legislature was here in Cheyenne. It's usually a legislative, lobbying type of thing. We have a couple of events, but as soon as the legislature left town, then the pandemic started to hit in early March. And since that time, all of our board materials and meetings have been virtual. We held our first main virtual meeting in May. That was about a 1.5-day event, 2-hour session in the morning, 2-hour session in the afternoon, 2-hour session the next morning, something like that. I think everyone's found that about 2 hours is the limit on a webinar or a board session when you do it virtually. That went pretty successful. We've had a number of update meetings, and we had a special board meeting in July. We had an update meeting in April, for example. So board meetings have become more frequent, but they've been virtual. And we have a virtual board meeting next week. And I think that's probably the pattern that we'll continue to see until we get the pandemic under control in the country. I think that we'll continue to meet virtually, but we'll meet more often, and perhaps for shorter sessions, but more often.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Have the trustees been able to participate in continuing education and preparing for decisions coming up on the agendas?
Well, I think part of it has gone very well in terms of providing material. I think the board is very much engaged, and the electronic formats actually allow them to examine the material, and maybe the increased frequency of meeting keeps them more on pace. We typically met quarterly, which means that some of the quarterly meeting is reminding people of where we were last quarter because it was 90 days ago or something like that. When you had a meeting the month before, or 6 weeks before, they're a little more spun up already. So I think that part of it's gone very well. The continuing education has been a little iffy. All the conferences got canceled, and that's been part of our traditional trustee education program. Is we recommend you attend this conference, or we recommend you attend this a physical session, and those things have all been canceled, but they've been replaced by pretty competent web-based stuff in many cases, and in some cases there's been more time for the board members to engage in some webinar-based education. But I think that is a challenge going forward. We also have the challenge with both employees and now a board member that they have been selected, interviewed, brought on board all during the pandemic. And now they're going to go through their first employment or their first board meeting, and they've never known a physical situation. We have one employee that we hired during the pandemic, and she's been working from home. She's only been in the office just a couple of times, and that's kind of the new world. We have a board member that this will be his first board meeting, and he was interviewed, recommended by the board, sent to the governor's office, and all that, and it's all been virtual.
Interesting. Well, maybe that's a good segue, Dave. What would you say are the key lessons learned from this, and how that's going to help your organization be better in the future?
Well, I think the key lesson in terms of technology is that systems like ours that had progressed into the digital age found that all of the investments that we've made to convert to digital records, to have a online member portal, an online employer portal, and to have a good website with good information for folks, and the ability to do some transactions online, all that paid off in the pandemic. Because of course, foot traffic plunged, even call volume plunged initially. Nobody wanted to think about retirement. They were just trying to get through the day. But over time, the value and the investments that we made in those systems, they've really only been coming online in the last 5 or 6 years. All paid off in this environment because you were able to say, we recommend you conduct business virtually by using one of our online tools. And the online tools, while not perfect, they were very competent. And most people found them satisfactory. There's a lot of issues with password resets and trying to get people into the system initially, but it all worked pretty well. So the lesson number one is your investments in technology are essential, and you've got to, they really pay off in an environment like this. And that's what we've also continued to do. We've made more investments in hardware and software to provide people state laptops so that they can connect directly to the state system from home, just like they would in the office, as opposed to a remote desktop thing, which many of us were relegated to. And that worked, but it's a little clunky and it's not as efficient. But we have also, if you want people to work from home, you have to resource it. So if you need 2 screens, like if you're a member benefits specialist, it really helps to have 2 screens. Yeah, we'll send 2 screens home with you. We're still having some challenges on thinking about printing, because we really don't want people printing out sensitive stuff with social security numbers at the house, because that stuff might get lost, and you just don't want that. But we're finding we're having to do it. So we're having to resource some shredders as well as a printer. And in some cases, initially, we had the whole section would work at home for a week, and the other half the section would be in the office, half the section would be at home, and you just rotate the next week. We found it better to do it kind of every other day. because then you can say, well, look, I will put these in queue. I'll actually print them out in my office computer, and I will pick them up and I will mail them the next day myself. And that way I know it got done versus having somebody else do it. So we're making some scheduling adjustments that way. Initially, the investment team was the first one out of the box to work completely remotely, and they've worked that way ever since March and continue to work that way because that's how they work most of the time. The big challenge has been with the customer contact and the folks that were administering the pension for our members, and that's been more challenging.
When we do get back to normal, which hopefully isn't that far out in the future, do you anticipate lasting changes from this in the way that you run the operations? Will you continue to have some people from home at times? And
yes, I think so. You know, I was involved in the contingency plannings, you know, that we did years ago, and it always involved, well, we would lift and shift to another location. We'd have the state office of administration find us more office space, or we would cram in with the state auditor's office, or we, you know, if the building got on fire, we'd go to a hotel or something. Now, we're not going to do any of that now. We've proven the thing to do is to disperse, go home. And the only real issue there is the robustness of the telecommunications ability to all those locations. But that's what we're going to do. That's our contingency plan. And going forward, we're going to exercise that contingency plan like many institutions already do. Once a month, everyone's going to be forced to work from home. That's going to be a business requirement. And in many cases, we're going to take advantage of it. We live in Wyoming. The weather in Wyoming can be iffy. We had a snowstorm here 2 days ago. Now, it snowed 3 inches on the 8th of September. And Interstate 80 was closed between Laramie and Cheyenne for several hours. That happens routinely during the wintertime here. So, you know, if it's a bad winter day, the roads may be open, but it still may not be a good idea for people to drive in. Work from home today. Also, you know, if the building does become a problem, work from home. If your childcare situation changed, the water line broke at the childcare facility and the kid's at home today, it's not a crisis, work from home today. And so we're going to adopt that as a way to make life better for people. I mean, even dumb stuff like, hey, I have a furniture delivery and they gave me a 6-hour window to deliver the thing. How do I handle that? Well, work from home today and take care of your furniture, and we've proven we can be just as effective in many cases working from home. So we'll exercise that, and it'll be part of our normal operation.
what about working with members and retirees and retirement planning and so forth? Do you see permanent changes there as well?
Yes, we have a traveling education operation. We have 3 educators that travel the state. They get to each corner of the state about 4 times a year. And members really appreciate that. They want to meet physically. But we've also found that they're more than willing to meet, just like you and I are talking right now on a Zoom call. And we've had some Zoom calls with, instead of packing, 50 people into a room, we'll have 200 people log into a Zoom session on how the pension works with Social Security and your 457 account to achieve financial security in retirement. And so it's been very successful. And so as more and more people become adept at technology, then they not only are willing to adapt to that, they're insisting on it. They don't want to go to a physical meeting. And it's we think we'll be able to reach more people more often and more effectively by using some of these virtual tools as a complement to our physical travels.
Mm-hmm. And then do you expect that the board will continue to have at least some meetings that will be virtual, or will there be greater use of that for board and committee meetings?
I think so. The board misses each other. They want to have the informal conversations about what did you think of that presentation, and they need to interact a little bit informally, and they miss that. But we've also proven that for actual material presentation and to get the formal presentation, the Zoom meetings work just fine. So I think what we will eventually go to is we will have shorter physical meetings, because they'll be supplemented by a virtual meeting that was held 6 weeks prior, and so and that'll be virtual. So I think we'll wind up with shorter physical meetings, because they'll be supplemented by the technology in between times. I think we'll start meeting, like, instead of quarterly, we'll meet every other month.
Mhm.
But some of those meetings will be short and will just be a 2-hour update session. And it'll allow the board to have more frequent interaction and direct the staff more frequently. And that can be important in some fast moving situations like when the legislature's in session.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dave. Very much appreciate you taking the time with us and sharing your insights. This has been very valuable, and I'm sure your peers will find some interesting nuggets in some of the things that you experienced.